A gunshot echoed across the vast Montana prairie as Olivia Keller clutched her 6-month-old daughter to her chest, tears streaming down her face while she watched the stagecoach disappear over the horizon, taking with it the last of her hopes that Thomas would return to them. The year was 1876, and Olivia had just received the telegram confirming what she'd feared for months. Her husband had been killed in a mining accident in Colorado, leaving her alone with their infant daughter, Emma, and a small homestead that needed more care than one woman could possibly provide. The wind whipped Olivia's auburn hair across her face as she turned and trudged back toward the modest cabin that had once represented their dreams. Now, it stood as a reminder of everything she'd lost. The small plot of land they'd staked their claim on 2 years ago stretched before her, the vegetable garden wilting from neglect as she'd spent her days caring for Emma and her nights worrying about their future. Olivia had just $20 to her name, a dwindling supply of food, and winter would be approaching in a few months. At 24 years old, she was a widow with few options in this unforgiving territory. "Come on, sweet girl," she whispered to Emma, who blinked up at her with innocent blue eyes. "We need to figure this out." As she approached the cabin, Olivia noticed dust rising from the trail that led toward her property. Her heart hammered in her chest as she quickened her pace, reaching for the shotgun she kept propped beside the door. In these parts, an unexpected visitor could mean anything from a friendly neighbor to a desperate outlaw. She positioned herself in the doorway, Emma balanced on her hip and the shotgun held firmly in her free hand. As the rider came into view, Olivia recognized the weathered face of Grant Prescott, a cowboy who worked for the neighboring cattle ranch owned by the wealthy Montgomery family. She lowered the gun slightly, but remained wary. While Grant had always been polite during their few interactions in town, she knew little about him beyond his reputation as a skilled horseman and dependable ranch hand. "Afternoon, Mrs. Keller," he called, tipping his hat respectfully as he brought his chestnut stallion to a halt several yards from her door. "Don't mean to intrude. Mr. Montgomery sent me to deliver a message." Grant Prescott was 30 years old, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were a clear green that contrasted with his rugged appearance, and a thin scar ran along his jawline, evidence of a hard life on the frontier. Despite his imposing height and broad shoulders, there was a gentleness to his manner that had always struck Olivia, even during their brief encounters. "What kind of message?" Olivia asked, adjusting Emma on her hip. The baby gurgled and reached toward Grant's horse with curious fingers. Grant dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "Mr. Montgomery heard about your husband. He offers his condolences." Grant shifted uncomfortably, clearly finding this part of his task difficult. "He also wanted me to inform you that he's interested in purchasing your land, should you be considering selling. Says it would make a fine addition to his grazing territory." Olivia's grip tightened on her shotgun. "I'm not selling. This land was Thomas's dream, our dream." Grant nodded as though he'd expected her answer. "I understand, madam, just delivering the message." He glanced at the overgrown fields and the sagging fence posts. "Though if you don't mind me saying, this is a lot for one person to manage, especially with a little one." "We'll manage just fine," Olivia replied, lifting her chin despite the uncertainty gnawing at her insides. Grant looked at her for a long moment, then at the baby. His expression softened. "I didn't come just to deliver Montgomery's message," he admitted. "I wanted to see if you needed anything. Help with repairs, perhaps, or—" He gestured vaguely toward the weathered barn where her 2 milk cows were lowing plaintively. "Why would you do that?" Suspicion edged her voice. "In this territory, nobody offered something for nothing. Because it's the right thing to do," he replied simply. "And because I know what it's like to lose family and face the wilderness alone." Olivia studied him, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, she slowly lowered the shotgun completely. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Prescott, but I can't afford to pay you." "Not asking for payment," he said. "I get Sundays off from the ranch, could spend a few hours here if you'd allow it, Before Olivia could respond, Emma began to fuss, her small face scrunching up in hunger. "I need to feed her," Olivia said, already turning toward the door. "Of course." Grant returned to his horse and mounted with easy grace. "I'll come by Sunday, Mrs. Keller. You can tell me then if you want my help or not." As he rode away, Olivia watched him go, a mixture of relief and trepidation filling her. She couldn't manage alone, that much was becoming clearer each day, but accepting help meant acknowledging her vulnerability, something she'd fought against her entire life. Inside the cabin, as Emma nursed contentedly, Olivia gazed out the window at the land that was both her burden and her legacy. "What do we do now, little one?" she whispered. "Your father is gone and we're all alone." Emma's tiny hand wrapped around her finger in response, and Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes once more. Whatever happened, she would fight to keep this land for her daughter. It was all they had left of Thomas, and the future he'd promised them. Sunday arrived with a sky so vividly blue, it seemed to mock Olivia's darkened spirits. She'd spent the night before mending one of her few dresses, determined to present a picture of capability rather than the desperation she felt. Emma had been fussy at dawn, perhaps sensing her mother's tension, but had finally settled into a morning nap. Olivia was pulling bread from her small cast iron oven when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She smoothed her apron, tucked a stray strand of auburn hair behind her ear, and stepped outside just as Grant arrived. He wasn't alone. A wagon followed behind his horse, loaded with lumber, tools, and what appeared to be several sacks of supplies. A young boy of about 16 sat in the driver's seat, looking around the property with obvious curiosity. "Morning, Mrs. Keller," Grant called, dismounting. "Hope you don't mind, but I brought my cousin Charlie along. Boy's good with woodwork and needs the experience." Charlie tipped his hat shyly. "Madam." Olivia regarded them both with surprise. "I didn't expect all this." Grant approached, his expression earnest. "Rode by your place last week and noticed your barn roof's got a worrisome sag to it. Winter's coming, and you'll need that structure sound." He gestured to the wagon. "Brought some supplies from the ranch. Mr. Montgomery won't miss them, they're leftovers from repairs to the main house." Olivia's pride warred with practicality. The barn roof did indeed need repair, and she lacked both the materials and knowledge to fix it. Still, accepting this much help felt like admitting defeat. "Mr. Prescott, while I appreciate your concern, I can't accept." A loud cry from inside the cabin interrupted her. Emma was awake and demanding attention. "Excuse me," Olivia said, turning to go inside. "We'll get started on the roof," Grant called after her. "You tend to your little one." By the time Olivia had changed and fed Emma, the sounds of hammering filled the air. She stepped outside with the baby on her hip to find Grant and Charlie already on the barn roof, systematically replacing rotted boards with fresh lumber. The efficiency of their movements spoke of experience and skill that Olivia knew she could never match. She approached the barn, shielding Emma's eyes from the bright sun. "Mr. Prescott," she called up. Grant paused, pushing his hat back to reveal a sweat-dampened forehead. "Yes, madam." "I've freshly baked bread and can offer you both lunch when you're ready." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his weathered features. "That would be mighty kind of you, Mrs. Keller." Over a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried venison that Grant had brought, an awkward silence initially hung between them. Charlie ate ravenously, but Grant seemed more interested in observing the small cabin and occasionally Olivia herself. "How long have you been working for the Montgomerys?" Olivia finally asked, bouncing Emma on her knee. "Going on 5 years now," Grant replied. "Came west from Pennsylvania after the war, needed open spaces after what I saw." "You fought in the war between the states?" Olivia asked, surprised. Grant didn't strike her as the soldier type. He nodded, his eyes momentarily distant. "Union cavalry, joined up in '63 when I was 18, saw things no man should see." He shook his head slightly, as if dispelling unwanted memories. "But that's long past now, and your family." "Lost my parents to fever when I was 14, raised by my uncle until I enlisted." He glanced at Charlie. "His father," the boy grinned around a mouthful of bread. "Pa says Grant's the responsible one of the family." A small smile touched Grant's lips. "Your pa's just glad I gave up my wandering ways." Olivia found herself curious about this man who had appeared in her life offering help without conditions. "And why did you give up wandering, I mean?" Grant's eyes met hers, their green depths thoughtful. "A man gets tired of not belonging anywhere. Montana's got a way of grabbing hold of your soul and not letting go." His gaze shifted to Emma, who was contentedly gumming a piece of bread crust. "Family roots are important, something worth building." The words hung in the air between them, laden with meaning that Olivia wasn't ready to acknowledge. She busied herself with wiping crumbs from Emma's chin. "What about you, Mrs. Keller?" Grant asked. "What brought you to this particular stretch of Montana?" Olivia hesitated, unused to sharing her story with strangers, but something about Grant's straightforward manner encouraged honesty. "Thomas, my husband, had big dreams. He grew up in a Chicago tenement and wanted open air and land of his own. We came here right after we married, 2 years ago. The first winter was," she swallowed hard, "it was difficult. But by spring, we'd built this cabin and started the garden. Thomas was so proud when he put in those fence posts." Her voice caught as she remembered her husband's face, flushed with pride and possibility as he'd surveyed their small homestead. "He talked about raising horses eventually," she continued softly. "Said this valley had the best grass he'd ever seen." "He wasn't wrong," Grant said, his voice equally quiet. "This is good land, the kind a man dreams about." Their eyes met again, and Olivia was startled by the understanding she saw in his. Not pity, but genuine comprehension of what Thomas had been reaching for and what she'd lost. The moment was broken when Emma let out a squeal and dropped her bread, sending both men into surprised laughter. The tension eased, and as Grant and Charlie returned to their work, Olivia found herself watching them with something close to gratitude. By sunset, the barn roof was repaired, the chicken coop reinforced against predators, and the sagging front porch steps replaced with sturdy new boards. As Grant and Charlie loaded their tools back into the wagon, Olivia stood in the doorway, Emma asleep in her arms, conflicting emotions churning within her. "Mr. Prescott," she called as Grant prepared to mount his horse. He turned, the fading sunlight catching in his dark hair. "Madam." "Thank you," she said simply, "for all of this." Grant studied her for a moment, then approached the porch. "Mrs. Keller, I'd like your permission to come back next Sunday. There's still that fence to repair and your water pump's making a sound it shouldn't." Olivia hesitated. Accepting one day's help was one thing, but establishing a pattern felt dangerously like dependence. Yet the reality of her situation was impossible to ignore. "Why are you doing this?" she asked directly. "Is it truly just neighborly kindness, or is there something else?" Grant's expression remained open, his eyes steady on hers. "When I first came to Montana, broken from war and with nothing to my name, someone showed me kindness that saved my life. I swore I'd pass that forward when I could." He glanced down at Emma. "Your husband had dreams for this land. Maybe I can help those dreams stay alive for his daughter." The simple sincerity in his words disarmed her defenses. "Then yes, Mr. Prescott, you may come back next Sunday." Grant nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Grant," he said. "If we're to be working together, you might as well call me Grant." "Olivia," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "My name is Olivia." As Grant and Charlie rode away in the gathering dusk, Olivia remained on the porch, Emma warm against her chest. For the first time since receiving the news of Thomas's death, she felt something other than despair, a tiny flicker of possibility that perhaps they weren't entirely alone after all. The following Sunday arrived with an unexpected autumn rainstorm that turned the dirt yard into mud and sent rivulets streaming down from the newly repaired roof. Olivia had convinced herself that Grant wouldn't come in such weather, and she ignored the surprising disappointment that thought brought. She busied herself with indoor tasks, singing softly to Emma as the rain pattered against the windows. The knock on her door shortly after noon startled her so much that she nearly dropped the pot of stew she was stirring. Opening the door revealed Grant, rain-soaked and muddy but smiling nonetheless. "Thought maybe we'd work on your interior today." he said by way of greeting, removing his dripping hat. That window in your bedroom's letting in more air than it should, and winter's coming fast. Olivia stood aside to let him enter, acutely aware of how small her cabin seemed with his tall form filling the space. You didn't have to come in this weather. Said I'd be here Sundays, he replied simply, as if that explained everything. He glanced around the cabin, his eyes landing on Emma, who was propped in a small wooden chair Grant himself had fashioned the previous week. The baby grinned toothlessly at him, recognizing her new friend. Hello there, little lady, Grant said, his voice softening as he crouched to Emma's level. You keeping your mama company on this rainy day? Emma babbled happily in response, reaching for his still damp sleeve with curious fingers. Olivia watched their interaction with mixed feelings. In the 3 Sundays Grant had been coming to help, Emma had grown increasingly attached to him. The baby, who had been fussy with strangers since birth, lit up whenever Grant appeared. It was both heartwarming and concerning another attachment that could be broken, another potential loss. I can't let you work without something warm in your stomach, Olivia said, returning to her stew pot. You'll catch your death otherwise. Grant straightened up, a genuine smile crossing his features. Wouldn't turn down your cooking, Olivia. Best meals of my week, truth be told. The casual compliment brought unexpected heat to her cheeks. In the past weeks, she'd found herself taking extra care with the Sunday meals, using precious spices and trying to recall recipes her mother had taught her long ago. She told herself it was simple gratitude for his help, nothing more. They ate at her small table, Emma occasionally reaching from Olivia's lap to grab at Grant's spoon, causing both adults to laugh. The easy domesticity of the scene wasn't lost on Olivia, nor was the stark contrast to the lonely meals she'd endured since Thomas's death. Tell me about your week, Grant said as they finished eating. It had become part of their routine, this exchange of stories between work sessions. Olivia described the letter she'd received from her sister in Ohio, the chicken that had mysteriously disappeared, likely a fox's dinner, and her attempts to preserve the last of the garden's vegetables for winter. Small things, ordinary things, yet Grant listened as though her words held great importance. In turn, he shared tales from the Montgomery ranch, the new thoroughbred that had arrived from Kentucky, Charlie's first successful cattle drive, the cook's legendary temper when someone stole pies cooling on the windowsill. Montgomery's bringing in some new hands, Grant mentioned as he helped clear the dishes. Ranch is expanding. He's got his eye on several properties around here. The implication hung between them. Edward Montgomery was the largest landowner in the territory, with a reputation for eventually acquiring whatever he set his sights on by fair means or foul. Has he mentioned my land again? Olivia asked, keeping her voice neutral. Grant hesitated. He asks about you sometimes. Whether you're managing, whether you might be reconsidering his offer. And what do you tell him? The truth, Grant replied, meeting her gaze directly. That you're managing better than anyone could expect and that your land isn't for sale. Something warm unfurled in Olivia's chest at his words, at his defense of her position, despite Montgomery being his employer. Thank you, she said softly. Grant nodded, then turned toward his toolbox. Now, about that window. They spent the afternoon in comfortable productivity, Grant repairing the window while Olivia mended clothes and played with Emma. The rain continued unabated, creating a cozy atmosphere within the cabin as they worked side by side. Tell me about Thomas, Grant said suddenly, breaking a companionable silence. If you don't mind sharing, that is. The request surprised Olivia. Few people asked about her husband anymore, as though his memory was something to avoid rather than honor. She found herself speaking without hesitation. He was a dreamer, she said, smiling at the recollection. Always seeing possibilities where others saw obstacles. We met in St. Louis. I was teaching at a small school and he came to fix the roof after a storm. He talked about Montana for hours that first day, painting such a vivid picture that I could almost see the mountains and valleys he described. She paused, remembering Thomas's animated face as he'd shared his vision. He wasn't perfect, Sometimes his dreams ran ahead of practicality. But his heart was good, and he loved this land with a passion I'd never seen before. Grant listened attentively, his hands still working but his eyes occasionally meeting hers. Sounds like a man who knew what he wanted. He did, Olivia agreed. When he left for that mining job in Colorado, it was only meant to be temporary, a way to earn money for more livestock and equipment. He promised he'd be back before Emma took her first steps. Her voice caught. He was so excited about being a father. Grant set down his tools and turned to face her fully. He'd be proud of you, Olivia, of how you're fighting to keep his dream alive for Emma. The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, broke something open inside her. Tears welled in her eyes, tears she'd been holding back for weeks in her determination to be strong. "I don't know if I can do it," she admitted, the words barely above a whisper. "Every day I wake up terrified that I'll fail, that I'll lose this place and have nothing to give Emma of her father's legacy." Grant moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring. "You're not alone in this fight anymore," he said quietly, his green eyes intent on hers. "I can't replace what you've lost, but I can promise you won't face this winter by yourself." Olivia looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his weathered face. In that moment, with rain drumming on the roof and Emma sleeping peacefully in her cradle, something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first Sunday. "Why does it matter so much to you?" she asked, needing to understand. Grant's gaze didn't waver. "Because from the moment I saw you standing in that doorway, shotgun in hand and baby on your hip, I knew you were someone worth helping, worth knowing." He paused, then added with gentle humor, "Even if you did look ready to shoot me." A laugh escaped her, breaking the tension. "I was," she admitted. "I'm still not entirely convinced you're real, Grant Prescott. Men like you who help without expecting anything in return don't often cross my path." "I'm real enough," he replied, a smile touching his lips. "Just a man who recognizes courage when he sees it." As the rain continued to fall outside, they returned to their tasks, but something had changed. Words unspoken hung in the air between them, a possibility neither was ready to name, but both had begun to feel. When Grant finally left at dusk, the rain having slowed to a gentle drizzle, Olivia stood in the doorway watching him ride away. Emma stirred in her arms, blinking sleepily at the departing figure. "He'll be back, little one," Olivia whispered, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "He'll come back to us." The weeks turned to months as autumn deepened into winter. Grant continued his Sunday visits without fail, each one bringing improvements to the homestead and a growing closeness between him, Olivia, and Emma. The baby had begun pulling herself up to stand, delighting both adults with her determination and earning proud applause from Grant that made her giggle with joy. December arrived with a bitter cold snap that froze the ground solid and dusted the landscape with an early snow. The Sunday before Christmas, Grant appeared with his wagon loaded not only with the usual tools and supplies, but also with a small fir tree tied securely in the back. "Every child deserves a Christmas tree," he explained as he set it up in the corner of Olivia's cabin. "Even if they're too young to remember it." That evening, they strung popcorn and dried berries around the tree while Emma watched from her blanket on the floor, attempting to catch the colorful strands as they dangled near her. "I have something for you," Grant said after they'd finished decorating. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small wooden horse, intricately carved and sanded smooth. "For Emma, made it myself during evenings at the bunkhouse." Olivia took the toy, running her fingers over the detailed craftsmanship. "Grant, it's beautiful." She knelt beside Emma, offering the horse to the curious baby, who immediately grabbed it with chubby hands. "My father carved toys," Grant explained, watching Emma explore her gift. "Taught me when I was young, said a man should be able to create beautiful things with his hands, not just practical ones." "He was right," Olivia said softly. She hesitated, then added, "I have something for you too." From a drawer in her small bureau, she retrieved a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "It's not much," she apologized as she handed it to him. Grant untied the package carefully, revealing a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "Olivia," he breathed, running his fingers over the soft fabric. "When did you find time to make this?" "Evenings, after Emma was asleep," she admitted. "The wool came from my sister in Ohio. She sent it in her last package." Grant wrapped the scarf around his neck, his expression one of genuine appreciation. "No one's made me something like this since my mother died," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you." They stood close together, the Christmas tree casting gentle shadows across the room and Emma babbling happily on her blanket. The moment felt weighted with possibility, with words unsaid. "Olivia," Grant began, taking a step closer. A sudden pounding on the door made them both jump. Grant immediately moved between Olivia and the entrance, his hand dropping instinctively to the pistol at his hip. "Mrs. Keller," a male voice called through the door. "It's Liam Donnelly from the general store. Got an urgent message for you." Olivia rushed to open the door, revealing the storekeeper's son, red-faced from riding in the cold. "What is it, Liam?" The young man thrust a telegram toward her. "Just came through from Colorado. Station master said it was important." Olivia took the paper with trembling fingers, a sense of foreboding washing over her. As she read the brief message, the blood drained from her face. "Olivia," Grant was beside her instantly, one hand steadying her elbow. "What is it?" She stared at the telegram, unable to believe the words before her. "Thomas," she whispered. "He's alive." The room seemed to tilt around her as Grant guided her to a chair. "What does it say?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. Olivia read aloud, her voice shaking. "Recovered from mining accident, amnesiac for months, returning to Montana. Arrive Helena Station December 24th, Thomas Keller." Silence fell over the cabin, broken only by Emma's continued happy babbling. Unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred in her world, Liam shuffled awkwardly at the door. "Mrs. Keller, I can spread word in town if you'd like. People will want to know." "Yes," Olivia said distractedly. "Thank you, Liam." After the young man left, Olivia and Grant remained frozen in place, neither seeming able to process the implications of the message. "He's alive," Olivia repeated, the words still not feeling real. "All this time." Grant's face had gone carefully blank, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the back of a chair. "This is wonderful news," he said, his voice strained. "A miracle for you and Emma." Olivia looked up at him, her emotions too chaotic to name. Joy, shock, and confusion warred within her, and beneath it all, an unexpected ache as she registered the careful distance that had already entered Grant's manner. "I don't understand," she said, more to herself than to Grant. "The mining company confirmed his death. They sent his personal effects." "Mining accidents can be chaotic," Grant said quietly. "Men get misidentified, and if he had amnesia—" "Yes," Olivia nodded slowly. "Yes, of course." She looked around the cabin, at the Christmas tree they had decorated together, at Emma playing on the floor at the life she had been rebuilding with Grant's help. A life that had begun to include possibilities she had only recently allowed herself to consider. Grant moved toward the door, reaching for his coat. "You'll need time to prepare for his return," he said, his voice neutral. "I should go." "Grant," Olivia stood, uncertain what to say, but knowing she couldn't let him leave like this. He paused, his back to her, shoulders rigid beneath his coat. "Thomas is coming home to his family," he said quietly. "That's all that matters now." Before Olivia could respond, he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that felt inexplicably final. Left alone with Emma, Olivia sank back into her chair, the telegram still clutched in her hand. Her husband was alive, the father of her child was returning to them. It was everything she had prayed for during those first desperate months of grief. Yet as she watched Emma playing with the wooden horse Grant had carved with such care, Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes, tears that held as much confusion as joy. Christmas Eve dawned clear and bitterly cold, the sun casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. Olivia stood before her small mirror, adjusting the collar of her best dress, the dark blue one she had worn to church on special occasions. now taken in to fit her frame that had grown thinner with the challenges of the past year. Emma, dressed in a freshly laundered gown and wrapped in a warm blanket, watched from her cradle with curious eyes. At 9 months old, she had no memory of the father who was returning to them today. No memory of any man in her life except for Grant, who had not returned to the homestead since the night of the telegram's arrival 5 days ago. The absence of his Sunday visit had left a hollow feeling in the cabin that Olivia tried desperately to ignore. She had spent the days cleaning every corner of their home, airing out Thomas's clothes and preparing for his return. Yet each task had been accompanied by thoughts of Grant, his steady presence, his quiet strength, the way Emma's face lit up when he entered the room. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. For a wild moment, hope surged that it might be Grant coming to check on them one last time. Instead, she opened the door to find Charlie, Grant's young cousin, shifting nervously on her porch. "Morning, Mrs. Keller," he said, removing his hat. "Grant sent me with the wagon, said you might need a ride to the Helena station to meet your husband's train." Olivia's heart sank and soared simultaneously. Grant hadn't forgotten them, yet he couldn't bring himself to come in person. "That's very thoughtful," she managed. "Please thank him for me." Charlie nodded, his young face serious. "He would have come himself, but Mr. Montgomery has him breaking the new horses today, couldn't get away." The explanation was reasonable enough, but Olivia suspected the truth was more complicated. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. "Let me gather Emma's things and we'll be ready to go." The journey to Helena took nearly 2 hours, the wagon moving slowly over snow-packed roads. Charlie, never much of a talker, focused on handling the horses, leaving Olivia alone with her tumultuous thoughts. What would it be like to see Thomas again? To introduce him to the daughter he'd never met? And what of the feelings that had begun to blossom between her and Grant, feelings she had only just started to acknowledge to herself? As they approached the town, Emma began to fuss, perhaps sensing her mother's anxiety. Olivia soothed her with gentle whispers, promising that everything would be all right, though she herself felt far from certain. The train station was bustling with Christmas Eve travelers, the platform crowded with families reuniting for the holiday. Olivia stood slightly apart from the crowd, Emma bundled against her chest, her eyes scanning each arriving passenger with a mixture of hope and apprehension. And then, suddenly, he was there. Thomas Keller stepped down from the train, thinner than she remembered and with a new scar across his forehead, but unmistakably her husband. He paused on the platform, searching the faces until his gaze landed on her. A look of profound relief washed over his features. "Olivia," he said as he approached, his voice exactly as she remembered it. "Oh God, Olivia." He embraced her carefully, mindful of the baby between them. Olivia returned the embrace automatically, her mind struggling to reconcile this moment with the grief she had lived with for months. Thomas was real, solid, alive against her, yet she felt strangely dislocated, as though watching the scene from a distance. Thomas pulled back to look at Emma, his eyes filling with tears. "This is her, this is our daughter, this is Emma," Olivia confirmed softly. Thomas reached out a tentative finger, which Emma grabbed immediately, a reflex she had developed with anyone new. "She's perfect," he whispered. "I've missed so much." The train whistle blew behind them, startling Emma, who began to cry. As Olivia soothed her, Thomas picked up his single bag and they made their way toward where Charlie waited with the wagon. "Who's this?" Thomas asked, eyeing the young man. "Charlie Prescott," Olivia explained. "He works at the Montgomery ranch. He offered us a ride home." If Thomas found this arrangement strange, he didn't comment. He simply nodded his thanks to Charlie and helped Olivia into the wagon before climbing in himself. The return journey was filled with Thomas's account of the past year, the mining accident that had nearly killed him, the months spent in a small Colorado clinic with no memory of his identity, and the gradual return of his memories that had finally led him back to Montana. "I kept seeing your face," he told Olivia, his eyes earnest. "Even before I remembered your name or mine, I knew I needed to find you." Olivia listened, trying to connect with the emotions his story should have evoked, yet feeling as though a pane of glass separated her from the man she had mourned so deeply. Thomas was exactly as she remembered him, his enthusiasm, his mannerisms, his way of speaking, yet something fundamental had shifted within her during their separation. As they approached the homestead, Thomas fell silent, taking in the changes to the property. The repaired barn roof, the new fence posts, the reinforced chicken coop, all Grant's handiwork over the past months. "You've maintained the place well," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Better than I expected, to be honest." The unintended slight stung more than it should have. "I had help," Olivia replied simply. Before Thomas could inquire further, they arrived at the cabin. Charlie helped unload Thomas's bag, then awkwardly cleared his throat. "I should get back to the ranch before dark," he said. "Congratulations on your return, Mr. Keller." As the wagon pulled away, Thomas stood before the cabin, seeming almost hesitant to enter what had once been his home. Olivia led the way inside, where the Christmas tree still stood in the corner, its decorations a testament to a moment of happiness now overshadowed by confusion. Thomas noticed it immediately. "You put up a tree," he said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "Just like you always wanted." Olivia nodded, unable to explain that the tree had been Grant's gift to Emma, one of many kindnesses from the man who had become so essential to their survival and happiness. As the day progressed into evening, the initial awkwardness began to ease. Thomas held Emma, marveling at her tiny features and attempting to win her trust with gentle words and smiles. The baby regarded him with serious eyes, neither rejecting nor embracing this stranger who was her father. They shared a simple Christmas Eve dinner, during which Thomas spoke enthusiastically about his plans for the homestead now that he had returned. "I've been thinking about expanding the northern field," he said between bites, "and maybe adding a few horses in the spring. The mining company gave me a settlement for my injuries, not much, but enough to get us started properly." His dreams were as big as Olivia remembered, his excitement familiar and once dearly missed. Yet as she listened, she found herself thinking of Grant's practical approach to improvements, how he had prioritized repairs that would see them safely through the winter before considering expansion. As night fell and Emma finally drifted to sleep in the cradle Grant had reinforced, Thomas reached across the table for Olivia's hand. "I know this must be strange for you," he said softly, "having me back like this after believing I was dead. It will take time for us to find our way back to each other." Olivia nodded, grateful for his understanding yet unable to express the true complexity of her feelings. "It will," she agreed, "but we have time now." Later, as Thomas slept in their bed, the first full night's rest he'd had in days, he claimed Olivia stood by the window, looking out at the moonlit landscape. In the distance, she could see the lights of the Montgomery ranch, knowing that somewhere among them was Grant, who had given so much of himself to her and Emma without asking for anything in return. On Christmas morning, as Thomas played with Emma on the floor and the baby gradually warmed to his presence, a knock came at the door. Olivia opened it to find not a visitor but a large bundle wrapped in burlap. A note was pinned to the top in a familiar handwriting for Emma, "Merry Christmas." "GP." Inside was a small rocking chair, perfectly sized for a child, beautifully crafted with gentle curves and smooth edges. Olivia ran her fingers over the wood, recognizing Grant's workmanship and the hours of care that had gone into creating this gift. "What's that?" Thomas asked, coming to stand beside her. "A Christmas gift for Emma," Olivia replied, her throat tight, "from a friend who has helped us while you were gone." Thomas examined the chair with appreciation. "Fine workmanship. You'll have to introduce me to this friend someday." Olivia simply nodded, unable to explain that the maker of this perfect little chair was the same man who had repaired their home, brought laughter back into their lives, and slowly begun to heal her heart, only to step away the moment Thomas returned. The days following Christmas passed in a blur of adjustment as Thomas reacquainted himself with the homestead and established a relationship with his daughter. He was a good father, patient and affectionate, and Emma gradually accepted his presence, Though she still looked toward the door each Sunday morning, her expression expectant. Grant did not return to the homestead. Olivia heard through town gossip that he had taken on additional responsibilities at the Montgomery ranch, working longer hours than ever before. The absence of his Sunday visits left a void that Thomas's return, welcome as it was, could not quite fill. January brought heavy snowfalls that isolated the homestead for days at a time. Thomas worked diligently, clearing paths and caring for the animals, his physical strength returning as he embraced the routines of farm life. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Thomas sharing stories of his time away while Olivia listened, trying to bridge the gap that still existed between them despite their efforts. One such evening, as Thomas mended a harness and Olivia knitted beside the fire, he asked the question she had been dreading. "Who was he, Olivia, the man who helped you while I was gone?" Olivia's hands stilled on her knitting. "His name is Grant Prescott. He works for the Montgomery ranch." Thomas nodded slowly. "And he just helped you out of kindness?" "Yes," Olivia replied simply, unable to elaborate on the connection that had formed between them or the feelings that had begun to grow. Thomas was quiet for a moment, his hands working the leather. "Charlie mentioned him on our ride from the station. Said Grant spent every Sunday here for months, fixing whatever needed repair." He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "That's a lot of kindness from a man with no obligation to you." Olivia met his gaze steadily. "He's a good man who saw a woman and child in need. Nothing more." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she couldn't bring herself to hurt Thomas with the truth that in his absence, her heart had begun to open to another. Thomas seemed to accept her explanation, returning to his work with a thoughtful expression. Yet something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of the year they had lost and the changes it had wrought in both their lives. February brought a temporary thaw, allowing for easier travel between homesteads. Thomas took advantage of the milder weather to visit town for supplies and to re-establish connections with neighbors. It was during one such trip that he first encountered Grant. Olivia was feeding the chickens. Emma balanced on her hip when Thomas returned from town earlier than expected, his expression troubled. "I met your Mr. Prescott today," he said without preamble as he dismounted from his horse. Olivia's heart stuttered. "He's not my Mr. Prescott," she replied carefully. "What happened?" Thomas removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Nothing happened. We were introduced at the general store. He was perfectly polite, congratulated me on my return." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "But the way he looked at you when I mentioned your name, Olivia, that wasn't just neighborly concern." Olivia focused on spreading feed for the chickens, avoiding Thomas's gaze. "Grant was kind to us when we needed help, that's all." "Is it?" Thomas stepped closer. "Because the entire town seems to have stories about the devoted cowboy who spent every free moment at the widow Keller's homestead. How he carved toys for her baby and repaired her home and brought supplies when she was struggling." Olivia finally looked up, meeting her husband's troubled gaze. "What exactly are you asking me, Thomas?" "I'm asking if you fell in love with him," Thomas said quietly. "If you would rather I had stayed dead so you could build a life with Grant Prescott." The blunt question struck Olivia like a physical blow. "That's unfair," she whispered, clutching Emma closer. "I mourned you, Thomas. I cried myself to sleep for months after receiving word of your death. That's not an answer." Olivia closed her eyes briefly, gathering her courage. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "I was learning to live again. Grant helped me do that. He showed kindness to your daughter when she had no father. He preserved your land when I couldn't manage alone." She paused, then added softly, "I won't apologize for the gratitude I feel toward him or for the friendship that developed between us." Thomas studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand," he said, though his expression suggested otherwise, "but he's not part of our lives now. We're a family again, you, me, and Emma. Whatever happened while I was gone, it's in the past." As he turned away to tend to his horse, Olivia remained still, Emma warm against her chest. Thomas's words echoed in her mind, along with the memory of Grant's voice that final evening. Thomas is coming home to his family. That's all that matters now. Both men had made the same assumption that Thomas's return automatically restored what had been lost. Neither seemed to understand that the woman Thomas had left behind no longer existed. In her place stood someone shaped by grief, survival, and unexpected connection, someone who had glimpsed a different kind of happiness before duty called her back. March arrived with promises of spring, the snow retreating to reveal muddy fields ready for planting. Thomas threw himself into preparations for the growing season with characteristic enthusiasm, his plans ambitious and forward-looking. Olivia worked alongside him, caring for Emma, tending the animals, and planting the vegetable garden that would sustain them through the next winter. They had settled into a routine that resembled their life before Thomas's accident, yet subtle differences remained moments of disconnect when a shared reference fell flat, or when Thomas suggested improvements to systems Olivia had established during his absence. They were polite with each other, considerate even, but the easy intimacy they had once shared remained elusive. Emma, now able to pull herself up and cruise along furniture, had fully accepted Thomas as a constant presence in her life. She reached for him with the same trust she showed Olivia, her baby laughter bringing moments of genuine joy to their sometimes strained interactions. It was during one such moment, as Thomas lifted Emma high above his head while she squealed with delight, that they heard the sound of an approaching rider. Olivia looked up from the garden bed. She was preparing to see Edward Montgomery himself approaching on a magnificent black stallion. Thomas set Emma down on a blanket in the yard and stepped forward to greet their visitor. Montgomery was an imposing figure, 60 years old with iron-gray hair and the weathered face of a man who had built an empire in unforgiving territory. He nodded curtly to Thomas before his gaze settled on Olivia. "Mrs. Keller," he said, removing his hat, "you're looking well. Motherhood agrees with you." "Mr. Montgomery," Olivia replied cautiously. "What brings you to our homestead?" Montgomery dismounted with the ease of a man half his age. "Heard your husband had returned from the dead," he said bluntly. "Thought I'd come see this miracle for myself and renew my offer for your land." Thomas's posture stiffened. "My wife mentioned your interest in our property, Mr. Montgomery. I'm afraid we're not selling." Montgomery smiled thinly. "Perhaps you should hear my new offer before deciding. $500, a generous sum for a parcel this size." "It would take 10 times that amount to tempt me," Thomas replied firmly. "This land is our future, our daughter's inheritance." Montgomery's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "The future is uncertain, Mr. Keller. This valley is changing. Small homesteaders like yourself are finding it increasingly difficult to compete with established operations." He gestured toward the distant mountains. "The railroad's coming through Garrison Junction next year. Those who position themselves wisely will profit. Those who cling to outdated notions may find themselves obsolete." The threat beneath his words was unmistakable. Thomas moved closer to Olivia, his stance protective. "We appreciate your concern for our welfare, Mr. Montgomery, but our decision is final. This land isn't for sale at any price." Montgomery regarded them both for a long moment, then replaced his hat. "As you wish, but remember my words when the hard times come." He turned to mount his horse, then paused. "By the way, Mrs. Keller, my foreman tells me you became quite friendly with one of my hands during your widowhood." Olivia felt heat rise to her face, aware of Thomas tensing beside her. "Mr. Prescott was kind enough to help with repairs around the homestead," she replied evenly. "Nothing more." Montgomery's smile turned knowing. "Of course. Well, you'll be pleased to know I've promoted Grant to oversee my new property near Bozeman. He left yesterday quite suddenly, as these opportunities often require. A shame he didn't have time to say goodbye to his friends." With those parting words, Montgomery mounted and rode away, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Thomas turned to Olivia, his expression a mixture of hurt and anger. "Is that true? Has Grant left the area?" Olivia stared after Montgomery's retreating figure, a cold emptiness spreading through her chest. "I don't know," she said truthfully. "I haven't spoken to Grant since the night we received your telegram." Thomas studied her face, seeming to read the emotions she couldn't hide. Without another word, he picked up Emma and carried her inside, leaving Olivia alone with her thoughts and the disturbing implications of Montgomery's visit. That evening, after Emma had been put to bed, Thomas and Olivia sat at their small table, the tension between them palpable. "Montgomery's lying," Thomas finally said, breaking the silence. "About Grant leaving, about the railroad, about our land becoming worthless, all of it." Olivia looked up from her sewing, surprised. "How can you be sure?" "I spoke with Jacob Miller at the general store today. The railroad's planned route is nowhere near Garrison Junction, it's coming through Helena proper. Montgomery's been spreading rumors to drive down land prices and force sales." Thomas's expression hardened. "As for Grant, I saw him myself in town just this morning. He's still working at the Montgomery ranch." Relief washed over Olivia at the knowledge that Grant hadn't left, followed immediately by confusion about Montgomery's lie. Why would he say that, then? Thomas's eyes met hers directly. "To hurt you, Olivia, and to see your reaction." He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Montgomery's a shrewd man. He sees what I see, that whatever happened between you and Grant Prescott during my absence wasn't just neighborly kindness." Olivia set down her sewing, her hands trembling slightly. "Thomas, let me finish," he said quietly. "I've been trying to pretend everything can go back to the way it was before, that we can simply continue as if I never disappeared, as if you never believed me dead, as if you never." He swallowed hard, "Never found comfort with another man." "Nothing happened between us," Olivia said softly, "not in the way you're implying, but something did happen," Thomas persisted. "Maybe not physically, but here." He touched his chest over his heart. "I see it in your eyes when his name is mentioned. I see it in the care he took with our home, with our daughter." Olivia remained silent, unable to deny the truth of his words. Thomas reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I love you, Olivia. I never stopped loving you, even when I couldn't remember my own name, but I won't keep you bound to me out of duty or pity." "It's not pity," Olivia protested, tears filling her eyes. "You're Emma's father, you're my husband. But am I still the man you want to build a life with?" Thomas asked gently. "Or am I just an obligation returned from the grave to complicate the new life you were creating?" The blunt question hung between them, demanding an honesty Olivia had been avoiding for weeks. She thought of the joy she had felt seeing Thomas alive, the gratitude for his safe return, but also of the growing connection she had shared with Grant, the understanding that had developed between them through shared work and quiet conversations. "I don't know," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I thought you were dead, I mourned you completely. I never expected to feel anything for anyone again." She paused, gathering her courage. "But then Grant came into our lives, and slowly, things began to change. He never presumed, never pushed. He just was there, steady and kind, asking nothing in return." Thomas's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Do you love him?" Olivia closed her eyes briefly. "I was beginning to," she confessed. "But then you returned, and he stepped away immediately. He believed your place in our lives was more important than whatever might have been growing between us." "A noble man," Thomas said quietly, "which makes this all the harder." Olivia looked at him questioningly. "I came back expecting to resume my life exactly as I left it," Thomas explained. "But while I was fighting to remember who I was, you were fighting to create a new life from the ashes of grief. We're both different people now, Olivia." "What are you saying?" Olivia asked, fear and confusion mingling in her chest. Thomas's expression was pained but resolute. "I'm saying I need to know if your heart truly welcomes my return or if it's divided, because I can't build our future on obligation or regret." The directness of his question struck Olivia with unexpected force. In the month since Thomas's return, she had been so focused on doing what was right, on honoring her marriage vows and providing Emma with her father, that she had avoided examining her own heart too closely. "I need time," she said finally, "to be sure of what I truly feel." Thomas nodded slowly. "Then take it," he said, releasing her hand. "I'll sleep in the barn until you decide. No pressure, no expectations." "Thomas, no, it's all right," he interrupted gently. I'd rather give you space to find clarity than force us into a pretense of happiness neither of us truly feels." As he gathered a blanket and pillow from their bed, Olivia watched him with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. Whatever else had changed, Thomas's fundamental decency remained intact. He was still the honorable man she had married, willing to put her needs before his own comfort. After he left for the barn, Olivia sat beside Emma's cradle, watching her daughter sleep peacefully, unaware of the adult's complicated emotions swirling around her. In the quiet darkness, Olivia finally allowed herself to face the question she had been avoiding: what did she truly want? The next morning dawned clear and cool, with the promise of spring evident in the budding trees and the first green shoots pushing through the soil. Olivia rose early, having slept little during the night. After checking on Emma, who was still sleeping soundly, she stepped outside to find Thomas already at work, mending the chicken coop with quiet efficiency. "Good morning," she called softly, approaching with a mug of coffee for him. He looked up, accepting the drink with a grateful nod. "Sleep well?" "Not really," she admitted. The barn's drafty," Thomas replied with a small smile, "but I've slept in worse places this past year." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of unresolved questions hanging between them. Finally, Thomas set down his mug and turned to face her fully. "I've been thinking," he began, "about what Montgomery said yesterday." Olivia tensed, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "Not about Grant," Thomas clarified quickly. "About the changes coming to this territory. The pressures facing small homesteaders like us." "What about them?" Thomas gestured toward their land, the modest fields, the small barn, the cabin they had built together. "Montgomery wants our land because it's valuable, more valuable than he's letting on. The creek that runs through our property is the most reliable water source in this part of the valley. If he controls it, he controls who thrives and who fails." Olivia nodded slowly, understanding the strategic importance of their location. "So what are you suggesting?" "That we need allies, not isolation," Thomas replied. "Other small landowners who share our interests. Together we might stand a chance against Montgomery's expansion." "And you have someone in mind?" Olivia asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Thomas met her gaze directly. "Grant Prescott knows Montgomery's operation from the inside. He's respected in the community and he cares about this land." He paused, then added quietly, "And about you and Emma." Olivia stared at him, speechless. "You want to work with Grant." "I want to survive," Thomas corrected. "For all of us to survive, and that might mean putting personal feelings aside for the greater good." Before Olivia could respond, Emma's cries sounded from inside the cabin. "She's awake," Olivia said, grateful for the interruption. "I should go to her." "Of course," Thomas nodded. "We can talk more later." As Olivia tended to Emma, her mind raced with the implications of Thomas's suggestion. Was he proposing a genuine alliance with Grant, or was this a test of her feelings? And how could she possibly face Grant again after their abrupt separation? The answer came sooner than expected. That afternoon, as Olivia hung laundry on the line while Emma played on a blanket nearby, the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Thomas, who had been working in the far field, came running at the noise, arriving breathless beside her as 3 riders appeared on the trail. Olivia recognized Grant immediately, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. He was accompanied by Charlie and another ranch hand she didn't recognize. "Did you send for him?" she asked Thomas quietly. Thomas shook his head, his expression concerned. "No, something must be wrong." As the riders drew closer, Olivia could see the tension in Grant's posture, the grim set of his mouth. He dismounted several yards away, approaching on foot with a respectful nod to both of them. "Thomas, Olivia." His voice was formal, his green eyes carefully avoiding prolonged contact with hers. "I apologize for the intrusion, but there's trouble coming." "What kind of trouble?" Thomas asked, stepping forward. Grant removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture Olivia remembered well. "Montgomery fired me this morning," he said bluntly. "After I refused to participate in his new plan for acquiring your land." Thomas's expression darkened. "What plan?" He's damming the creek upstream from your property, Grant explained. Plans to divert the water away from your land entirely starting tomorrow. Without that water source, your crops will fail, your animals will suffer, and he believes you'll have no choice but to sell. Olivia gasped, instinctively moving to gather Emma from her blanket. Can he do that, legally? The water rights are complicated, Grant admitted. The original survey was vague about boundaries. Montgomery's counting on the fact that you can't afford a prolonged legal battle. Thomas's jaw tightened. So he's given up on buying us out and decided to force us into ruin instead. That's the essence of it, Grant confirmed. I told him it was wrong, that what he was planning amounted to theft. That's when he fired me and ordered me off his property. A grim smile touched his lips. Gave me 1 hour to collect my things and leave. And you came straight here, Thomas observed. Why? Grant's eyes finally met Olivia's, then returned to Thomas. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply, and because I owe you both that much. The admission hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Olivia clutched Emma closer, her heart racing at Grant's presence and the threat he described. How much time do we have? Thomas asked, breaking the tense silence. Montgomery's men will begin construction on the dam at first light tomorrow, Grant replied. Once it's complete, the creek will dry up on your property within days. Thomas turned to survey their land, his expression calculating. We need to speak with the other homesteaders who rely on that creek, he said decisively. United, we might have a chance of stopping this, Grant nodded. I've already sent Charlie to alert the Johnsons and the Wilsons. They should be here within the hour. Olivia watched the exchange between the two men with growing amazement, Thomas's strategic thinking complemented by Grant's practical action. Their mutual concern for the homestead temporarily overriding the complicated emotions between them. I'll prepare food for everyone, she said, finding her voice. We'll need to discuss this together. As she turned toward the cabin with Emma, she heard Thomas ask Grant in a low voice, Will you stay and help us fight this? Grant's reply was quiet but firm. As long as you want me here, I'll stay. The words echoed in Olivia's mind as she entered the cabin, the same words Grant had once spoken to her, now offered to her husband in a different context, but with the same unwavering commitment. By sunset, the small cabin was crowded with concerned neighbors, the Johnsons, an elderly couple whose vegetable farm depended on the creek. The Wilsons, a family with 5 children whose dairy cows needed the water, and several other small landowners whose properties would be affected by Montgomery's dam. Grant stood near the door as Thomas explained the situation, his tall figure drawing Olivia's awareness despite her attempts to focus on the discussion at hand. Emma, who had been passed around among the cooing neighbors, suddenly spotted Grant and let out a delighted squeal, reaching toward him with determined arms. Before Olivia could intercept her, Emma had crawled across the floor with surprising speed and pulled herself up on Grant's boots, babbling excitedly. The conversation in the room faltered as all eyes turned to the baby's clear recognition of the cowboy. Grant's expression softened as he looked down at Emma, though he made no move to pick her up. "Hello, little lady," he said quietly. "You've gotten faster since I saw you last." The simple exchange created a momentary tableau that highlighted the complicated relationships in the room. Olivia found herself frozen, aware of the neighbor's curious glances and Thomas's unreadable expression as he watched his daughter's obvious affection for Grant. It was Mrs. Johnson who broke the tension, her practical voice cutting through the awkward silence. "That child knows who helped keep her warm and fed during the hard months," she said matter-of-factly. "Now, are we going to stop this water-stealing scoundrel or not?" The discussion resumed with renewed focus, plans forming as the group considered their limited options. Physical resistance to Montgomery's crew seemed impossible. He employed too many men with guns. Legal action would take time they didn't have. Appealing to the territorial authorities might work eventually, but wouldn't stop the immediate threat. "What about the dam itself?" Grant suggested finally. "Montgomery's planning a simple earthen structure. If it were to fail naturally, perhaps from a spring flood or an unexpectedly high water level, he'd have to reconsider his approach. The implication was clear, though carefully phrased to avoid explicit discussion of sabotage. The assembled neighbors exchanged thoughtful glances, weighing the risks of direct action against the certainty of ruin if they did nothing. "The snowmelt is heavy this year," Thomas observed. "The creek's already running high," Grant nodded, meeting his gaze with silent understanding. "Very high." As the meeting concluded with agreements to watch the creek and alert each other of any developments, the neighbors departed with renewed determination. The Johnsons took Charlie with them, offering him a place to stay since he too had been dismissed from Montgomery's employ for his loyalty to Grant. Left alone in the cabin, Olivia, Thomas, and Grant stood in an uncomfortable triangle, Emma now sleeping peacefully in her cradle after the excitement of the evening. "You can stay in the barn," Thomas finally said to Grant. "We'll need to move quickly tomorrow." Grant nodded his thanks. "I appreciate that." As he turned to leave, Olivia found her voice. "Grant." When he paused, looking back at her, she continued, "Thank you for coming to warn us, for risking your position." A shadow of a smile crossed his face. "Wasn't much of a position worth keeping if it meant standing by while Montgomery destroyed your home." His eyes met hers briefly, then shifted to Thomas. "Your home," he amended. After Grant had gone, Thomas and Olivia stood in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. "He loves you," Thomas said finally, his voice gentle rather than accusatory. "Both of you." Olivia couldn't deny it. "Yes," she whispered, "but he respects you and what we built here." Thomas moved to the window, looking out toward the barn where Grant would be spending the night. "When I was lost in Colorado," he said slowly, "there was a woman who cared for me, a widow named Sarah who took in injured men from the mine. She was kind and good, and for a time I thought perhaps." He trailed off, then turned back to Olivia. "I understand how it happens, Olivia. How the heart can open to someone else when circumstances change." The admission stunned Olivia. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because it didn't seem important once my memory returned," Thomas replied. "I remembered you, our life together, and Sarah became part of a dream I was waking from." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "But now I wonder if it's that simple, if we can truly go back to what was before, or if we must acknowledge that we've both changed." Olivia moved closer to him, seeing her husband with new clarity. "What are you saying, Thomas?" He took her hands in his touch gentle. "I'm saying that tomorrow we fight for our land together, you, me, and Grant. And after that's resolved, we need to make decisions about our future with complete honesty." "And if that honesty leads to difficult truths?" Olivia asked, her heart racing. Thomas's smile was sad but genuine. "Then we face them with the same courage we're facing Montgomery. Some things are worth fighting for, Olivia, and some things need to be set free." Dawn broke with ominous gray clouds gathering on the horizon, promising rain later in the day. Thomas and Grant had already departed, heading upstream to observe Montgomery's operation and determine their course of action. Olivia remained at the homestead with Emma, her nerves frayed with worry over both the threat to their land and the unresolved tensions between the two men who had gone to confront it together. Mrs. Wilson arrived mid-morning with her oldest daughter, offering to watch Emma while Olivia joined the efforts at the creek. "Men think they're the only ones who can fight for what's important," the older woman said with a knowing smile, "but sometimes a woman's voice is what's needed." Grateful for the support, Olivia saddled her mare and rode toward the upstream location Grant had described. The journey took nearly an hour, the terrain becoming increasingly rocky as she approached the narrower section of the creek where Montgomery planned his dam. The sound of voices and machinery reached her before she crested the final rise. Staying hidden among the trees, Olivia surveyed the scene below. A crew of at least 15 men worked at the creek's edge, positioning large logs and piling earth to create a barrier across the flowing water. Nearby, Montgomery himself sat on horseback, overseeing the operation with evident satisfaction. On the opposite bank, partially concealed by brush, Olivia spotted Thomas and Grant in silent observation. Several other neighboring farmers had joined them, their expressions grim as they watched their water supply being stolen before their eyes. Olivia guided her horse carefully down the slope to join them, drawing surprised looks from both Thomas and Grant as she approached. "You shouldn't be here," Thomas whispered urgently. "It could get dangerous." "It's my land too," Olivia replied firmly, "and my daughter's future. I have every right to be here." Grant's expression held a mixture of concern and admiration. "She's right," he told Thomas. "And besides, Montgomery's less likely to order his men to shoot if there's a woman present." Thomas looked as though he wanted to argue further, but instead turned his attention back to the dam construction. "They're working fast," he observed. "The structure will be complete by nightfall at this rate. And with the rain coming," Grant added, nodding toward the darkening sky, "the creek will rise quickly behind it. Once that happens, the flow to your properties will stop entirely." Olivia studied the workers, noting their efficiency and the quality of the materials being used. "This isn't a temporary measure," she realized aloud. "Montgomery intends this to be permanent." "Of course he does," came a voice from behind them. The group turned to find Edward Montgomery himself approaching on horseback, flanked by two armed ranch hands. His cold smile took in the assembled farmers, lingering on Grant with particular disdain. "I was wondering when you'd show yourselves," Montgomery continued, dismounting with deliberate casualness. "Come to admire my new water management system. It's quite impressive, isn't it?" Thomas stepped forward, his posture tense but controlled. "You know this is wrong, Montgomery. That creek has served multiple properties for years. You have no right to divert it entirely for your own use." Montgomery's smile didn't waver. "Actually, I have every right. The original territory survey places the headwaters of this creek entirely within my property boundaries. What flows downstream is, legally speaking, mine to allocate as I see fit. That survey was conducted before most of these homesteads were established," Grant argued. "The territorial authorities have since recognized water rights for all properties along the creek's path." "A technicality that would take years to resolve in court," Montgomery replied dismissively. "Years that your little farms don't have." His gaze shifted to Olivia. "Though I'm still willing to make a fair offer for your land, Mrs. Keller, save yourself and your daughter the hardship to come." Before Olivia could respond, a rumble of thunder sounded overhead and the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Montgomery glanced skyward with mild annoyance. "You should all return to your homes," he advised, his tone mockingly concerned. "This storm looks to be a significant one." "My men will continue working. Of course we have a schedule to maintain." As Montgomery turned to leave, Grant stepped forward. "Edward," he called, using the rancher's first name with deliberate familiarity. "You taught me something important when I first came to work for you." "Do you remember what it was?" Montgomery paused, looking back with narrowed eyes. "I taught you many things, Prescott. You do well to remember all of them." "You said that in Montana, a man's reputation is his most valuable possession," Grant continued, his voice carrying to the workers at the dam site who had paused to listen. "That once lost, it can never truly be recovered." Several of the men exchanged glances, clearly recognizing the principle their employer had often espoused. "Are you threatening me?" Montgomery asked, his genial mask slipping to reveal anger beneath. "Not at all," Grant replied calmly, "just reminding you of your own wisdom. When word spreads about how Edward Montgomery stole water from families with young children, from elderly couples who have worked this land for decades, what will that do to the reputation you've spent a lifetime building?" A murmur ran through the watching workers and Montgomery's expression darkened. "Get back to work," he snapped at his men before turning back to Grant. "You always were too idealistic for your own good, Prescott. This territory wasn't built on fairness, it was built by men who understood power and weren't afraid to use it." "You're right about one thing," Thomas interjected, stepping forward to stand beside Grant. "This territory was built by those who weren't afraid. But it was built by all of us ranchers, farmers, tradespeople working together against common threats." He gestured to the assembled neighbors. We're not leaving, Montgomery, and we're not letting you steal what rightfully belongs to all of us. The rain intensified, plastering Thomas's hair to his forehead and soaking through Olivia's coat as she moved to join him and Grant. Around them, the other farmers stepped forward as well, presenting a unified front despite their bedraggled appearance. Montgomery assessed them coldly, calculating his options as the storm grew stronger. Finally, he mounted his horse with deliberate slowness. "Noble sentiments," he said, "but ultimately futile. My dam will be completed today, regardless of your presence or the weather." With that, he rode back toward his workers, barking orders that sent them scrambling back to their tasks despite the increasingly heavy downpour. "What now?" one of the neighboring farmers asked, water streaming from his hat brim. "We can't just stand here while they finish it." Grant turned to survey the rapidly rising creek, his expression thoughtful. "We don't have to do anything," he said quietly. "Nature's going to handle this for us." As if in response to his words, a loud crack of thunder split the sky and the rain transformed into a deluge. The creek, already swollen from spring snowmelt, began to rise visibly, churning around the partially constructed dam with increasing force. One of Montgomery's workers shouted in alarm as a section of the earthen barrier suddenly collapsed, washing away in the torrent. Another man dropped his tools and scrambled up the bank as the water surged against the remaining structure. "It's not going to hold," Thomas exclaimed, a note of triumph in his voice. "The creek's too powerful." Olivia watched in astonishment as nature accomplished in minutes what they had feared would require dangerous intervention. The combined force of the flash flood and the poorly constructed dam created a spectacle of destruction as logs shifted. Earth washed away, and Montgomery's entire project began to disintegrate before their eyes. Montgomery himself sat rigid on his horse, his face a mask of fury as he watched his plans literally wash away. With a sudden decisive movement, he spurred his horse forward, charging directly toward where Grant, Thomas, and Olivia stood. "This isn't over," he shouted over the storm's roar. "I'll rebuild stronger, and I'll make sure you all regret this day." As he approached, his horse suddenly shied at a flash of lightning, rearing up with a terrified whinny. Montgomery, caught off guard, lost his balance and tumbled backward from the saddle. He landed heavily on the muddy bank, sliding several feet toward the raging creek. Without hesitation, Grant lunged forward, grabbing Montgomery's arm just as the older man was about to be swept into the water. With Thomas's help, he pulled the rancher to safety, both men straining against the force of the current that sought to claim them all. For a moment, the three men remained frozen in tableau, Montgomery on his knees in the mud, staring up at Grant and Thomas with stunned recognition of what had just occurred. Around them, both ranch hands and farmers had witnessed the rescue, their expressions reflecting the significance of the moment. "You saved my life," Montgomery finally said, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Any decent man would have done the same," Grant replied simply. Montgomery struggled to his feet, his customary arrogance notably diminished. He looked from Grant to Thomas, then to the assembled farmers who had moved closer during the drama. "The dam was a mistake," he said finally, the admission clearly difficult for him. "The creek is more powerful than I anticipated." "The creek isn't the only powerful thing in this valley," Thomas observed quietly. "The people who live here, who work this land, were stronger together than apart." Montgomery's gaze swept over the group, taking in their unified stance, the determination in their expressions despite the driving rain. Something shifted in his face, not quite surrender, but a reluctant acknowledgement of a new reality. "I'll have my lawyers review the water rights," he said stiffly. "Perhaps a more equitable arrangement can be reached." With that concession, he called to his men to gather their equipment and retreat, the dam project abandoned as completely as the structure itself, which had now vanished beneath the churning waters. As Montgomery and his workers departed, a cheer went up from the assembled farmers, their relief and triumph palpable despite the continuing storm. Handshakes and backslaps were exchanged, promises made to meet soon and formalize their coalition. Olivia found herself standing between Thomas and Grant, the rain washing down her face, mingling with tears of relief she hadn't realized she was shedding. Without thinking, she reached out, taking each man's hand in hers, a gesture of gratitude and connection that acknowledged all they had accomplished together. For a brief moment, the three of them stood united by more than their victory over Montgomery, united by their complex bonds of love, respect, and shared purpose. Thomas's hand tightened around hers, while Grant's touch remained gentle, ready to release her at any moment. "We should get home," Thomas said finally, glancing at the sky. "Check on Emma and spread the news." Olivia nodded, reluctantly releasing both their hands. As the group began to disperse, making their way back to their respective homesteads, the rain gradually eased and hints of sunlight began to break through the clouds. It seemed a fitting metaphor for the moment, a storm weathered, clarity emerging, and decisions still to be made beneath clearer skies. The following day dawned bright and clear, the storm having washed the world clean and left the creek flowing more vigorously than ever. Olivia stood on the porch, watching Emma crawl enthusiastically through the grass, her tiny hands reaching for wildflowers that had seemingly sprung up overnight. In the barn, Thomas and Grant worked side by side, repairing equipment damaged during the winter months. Their voices occasionally carried to where Olivia stood, measured, respectful, without the tension she had feared might erupt between them. The events at the creek had created a temporary truce, a shared purpose that transcended their complicated personal situation. Yet Olivia knew that resolution could not be postponed indefinitely. Sooner or later, they would have to confront the question that hung unspoken among the three of them. As if summoned by her thoughts, both men emerged from the barn, deep in conversation that halted when they noticed her watching. Grant removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve, while Thomas approached the porch with purposeful strides. "We need to talk," he said simply, his expression serious but not unkind. "All of us." Olivia's heart quickened, but she nodded, gathering Emma from the grass. "Let me put her down for her nap first." When she returned, Thomas and Grant were seated at the small table outside the cabin, a pitcher of water between them. They both stood as she approached, the courtesy so automatic it might have been comical under different circumstances. "Sit, please," she said, taking a seat herself. "What is it you wanted to discuss?" Thomas and Grant exchanged a glance before Thomas spoke. "Yesterday changed things," he began, "not just with Montgomery and the water rights, but between us as well." Olivia waited, sensing he had more to say. "Grant and I have been talking," Thomas continued, "about the future of this homestead, about what's best for everyone involved." "What do you mean?" Olivia asked, a note of apprehension entering her voice. Thomas took a deep breath. "I've decided to accept a position with the Territorial Land Office in Helena," he said. "They need someone who understands the complexities of water rights and property disputes. After yesterday, several of our neighbors suggested I might be the right person for the job." Olivia stared at him in shock. "But what about our land, our plans?" "The land will remain yours," Thomas said gently. "Yours and Emma's. I'll come visit regularly, be part of her life as she grows," but he hesitated, then continued with evident difficulty. "But I think we both know that things between us have changed, Olivia. What we had before my disappearance, that connection, it's different now." "Thomas," Olivia began, but he held up a hand. "Please, let me finish. When I came back, I wanted everything to be as it was before." "But that's not possible. We've both changed. Your heart has changed." His gaze shifted briefly to Grant, who sat silently watching the exchange. "And if I'm being honest with myself, so has mine." "The woman in Colorado," Olivia said softly, remembering his earlier mention of Sarah. Thomas nodded. "I've written to her. She's agreed to come to Helena to see if what we began there might have a future." He reached across the table, taking Olivia's hand. "I'll always care for you, Olivia. You're Emma's mother, and what we shared was real. But holding on to something that's no longer there isn't fair to any of us." Tears filled Olivia's eyes, not from grief, but from the profound recognition of truth in his words. "Are you sure about this?" "I am," Thomas replied with surprising certainty. The land office position is a good one with a steady salary. I'll be able to provide financial support for Emma and I'll see her regularly, but this homestead. He glanced around at the property they had built together. This needs someone who loves it the way you do, the way Grant does. At the mention of his name, Grant finally spoke. I would never presume to take your place, Thomas, he said quietly. Not here, not with your family. Thomas turned to him with a sad smile. You're not taking anything I haven't already lost, he replied. And I'd rather see this land and these people cared for by someone who truly loves them. The simplicity of his statement left both Olivia and Grant speechless. In Thomas's face, Olivia saw not defeat but a kind of peace, the resolution of a man who had confronted hard truths and chosen integrity over pretense. What happens now? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That's for you to decide, Thomas answered. Both of you. I'll be leaving for Helena at the end of the week to secure housing and begin my new position. After that, he shrugged. After that, life continues, just in a different shape than we expected. With those words, he stood, placing a gentle hand on Olivia's shoulder before walking toward the barn, leaving her alone with Grant for the first time since Thomas's return. The silence between them stretched, filled with unspoken questions and tentative hopes. Grant's green eyes held hers, searching for permission, for certainty, for any sign of what she wanted from him. He's a good man, Grant finally said, better than most would be in his position. Yes, Olivia agreed softly. He is. Grant leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. Olivia, I need you to know that I never intended for any of this to happen. When I first came here, I only wanted to help a woman and child in need. I didn't expect to feel what you came to feel, she finished for him. Neither did I. Grant's hand moved across the table, stopping just short of touching hers, an invitation rather than a presumption. What do you want, Olivia? Truly want? The question hung between them, demanding complete honesty. Olivia thought of the months Grant had spent helping them, the quiet conversations by firelight, the way Emma's face lit up at his approach. She thought of Thomas's generosity in stepping aside, recognizing a truth she had been afraid to acknowledge. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand in Grant's, feeling the calluses from years of hard work, the gentle strength that had supported her through the darkest period of her life. I want what I've been afraid to admit, she said quietly. A chance to see what might grow between us without guilt or uncertainty. A partner who loves this land as much as I do, who sees its value beyond what can be measured in dollars. Grant's fingers tightened around hers, his eyes never leaving her face. And Emma. She already adores you, Olivia replied with a small smile. And Thomas will always be her father. She'll grow up knowing she's loved by many people, each in their own way. Grant nodded, relief evident in his expression. It won't be easy, he warned. People will talk. Montgomery may still cause problems, and building a life together takes work. I'm not afraid of work, Olivia reminded him, and neither are you. A smile spread across Grant's face, the full, unguarded smile she had seen so rarely and missed so deeply. No, he agreed, we're not. In that moment, with the sun warming their joined hands and the sounds of spring surrounding them, Olivia felt a certainty she had thought lost, forever the certainty that sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as its deepest sorrows, and that love, in its many forms, could heal even the most broken paths. 2 years later, on a golden autumn afternoon, the homestead bustled with activity as neighbors gathered to celebrate the harvest. Tables laden with food stretched across the yard, children played beneath the shade of newly planted trees, and laughter rang out against the backdrop of mountains touched with the first hints of snow. Olivia stood on the porch, watching Emma, now 3 years old, run squealing with delight as her baby brother, James, crawled determinedly after her. Behind them, Grant supervised their play with vigilant eyes, ready to intervene if Emma's enthusiasm endangered her little brother. The sight of them together, Grant with the children he loved as his own, filled Olivia with contentment so complete it almost overwhelmed her. Their marriage the previous spring had been a simple affair, attended by neighbors and friends who had supported them through the transition from their unusual beginning to their joyful present. "They're growing so fast," came a familiar voice beside her. Olivia turned to find Thomas, who had arrived from Helena that morning with Sarah, now his wife of 6 months. "They are," she agreed warmly. "Emma was so excited to show you how well she rides her pony." Thomas smiled, his gaze following his daughter's energetic path across the yard. "She's fearless, just like her mother." He glanced at Olivia. "You look happy." "I am," she replied simply. "We all are." And it was true. The arrangement they had created, unconventional by most standards, had flourished into something beautiful. Thomas visited regularly, his relationship with Emma strong and loving. His position with the land office had proven beneficial for all the small homesteaders in the area, providing legal protection for water rights and fair resolutions to property disputes. Montgomery, chastened by his near-death experience and the unified front presented by the community, had gradually adopted more neighborly practices. While never exactly friendly, he had become a reluctant participant in the cooperative agreements that now governed water usage throughout the valley. Grant had proven to be exactly what Olivia had glimpsed in those early Sunday visits, a partner of unwavering reliability, gentle strength, and genuine love for the land and the family they were building together. With his knowledge of ranching and her determination, they had expanded the homestead to include a small herd of horses, making the first steps toward Thomas's original dream for the property. "Sarah seems to be adapting well to Montana," Olivia observed, nodding toward where Thomas's wife chatted comfortably with Mrs. Johnson, her rounded belly evidence of their own growing family. "She loves it here," Thomas confirmed. "The medical practice she's establishing is filling a real need in Helena." He paused, then added softly, "We've found our place just as you and Grant have found yours." As if hearing his name, Grant looked up from his play with the children, meeting Olivia's gaze across the yard. Even after 2 years together, that simple connection still sent warmth spreading through her chest, a recognition of how far they had come and how much they had overcome. "My child's father was gone," Olivia said quietly, remembering the despair of those early days after receiving the telegram announcing Thomas's death. "But then a cowboy came and said he would stay." She turned to Thomas with a soft smile. "None of us could have imagined where that would lead." Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Life rarely follows the paths we expect," he replied. "Sometimes it leads us to exactly where we need to be, even when we resist the journey." As the celebration continued around them, with neighbors sharing food and stories beneath the Montana sky, Olivia watched Grant lift little James onto his shoulders while taking Emma's hand in his. Her family unconventional, unexpected, and absolutely perfect in its own way. The woman had said, "My child's father is gone," and the cowboy had said, "Then let me be the one who stays." Neither could have known how completely that simple promise would transform all their lives, creating from loss and uncertainty a tapestry of connections stronger than any single thread could be alone. And as the sun began its descent behind the mountains they all loved, casting long golden light across the land they had fought for together, Olivia knew with absolute certainty that some promises, made in the right moment by the right heart, had the power to heal wounds, bridge differences, and create families bound not by convention but by the deepest kind of love.